I'm delighted to be, of course, here with Peter, with Janice and Judith, and with Chuck, who had a fundraiser to go to, surprise, surprise, and with David Brooks. David is a wonderful colleague whom I cherish. He had the nicest thing to say about me. I said about him one night that David Brooks is 100% right 37% of the time. And David quickly responded that I am 37% right 100% of the time. So I guess we're even there. And it's always a treat to come to New York, having covered Rudy Giuliani's campaign, one of the truly great political disasters of all time. $57 million spent, one delegate collected. I do want to say this about Peter's work. It is a work of profound humanity and truly of exceptional scholarship. It's as poignant as it is personable. And it's about the deliberate policies that have shifted the cost and responsibility and the burden of economic risk from the American government and business to the individual family. We're all products and prisoners to some degree of our own experiences. I've covered the same campaign David is covering, and I've seen the same anxiety and felt the same pain. It's a near universal experience. It's not an experience, let it be noted, for United States senators. United States senators have not had, there's not a single United States senator who has had his or her health care coverage canceled. There's not a single United States senator or member of Congress who has had his or her defined benefits in any way tampered with in the past 7, 8, or 10 years. They have guaranteed pensions. They don't see their security threatened and disappear. Their pensions are not buffeted or threatened by sinking stocks or by unwise investments. What is at work here, in my judgment, and what's happened over the last generation, and this is, I think, the most serious symptom and result of it, is there's been a bargain between conservatives and liberals. It's been an unholy bargain. And the bargain's gone like this. The conservatives have essentially said, you keep your hands off our market, and we'll keep our hands off your bedroom. Liberals have privatized the culture, and conservatives have privatized the economy. What is missing is any sense of reciprocal citizen responsibility. The first two institutions most threatened by the privatizing of the culture, of course, are organized religion and the military draft. Military draft was abolished after much debate, but the central premise remained. It was that a citizen no longer owed a responsibility to defend his country, that it became a job. It became a private enterprise experience. And I really do think that that is seen in the tragedy that is felt in the casualty of the loss of American optimism. We are, by actual measurement, Americans, the most optimistic people on the face of the earth. It is deep in our genes as a people. With the exception of those whose ancestors were here when Columbus arrived, or those whose ancestors were brought here against their will in chains, every American is either himself or herself an immigrant, or the direct lineal descendants of immigrants. And much has been written and rhapsodized about the immigrant experience and the courage required, and it's enormous. To leave friends, family, familiar surroundings, to strike out across the sea or the continent to a place you've never been, to live among people you've never met, to speak a language in many cases you've never heard. But it's also an act and statement of profound optimism, a belief that somewhere I can breathe free and make things better, if not immediately for myself, than for those who come after me. And that American optimism has never been on greater display than the middle of the Civil War, the bloodiest experience this nation's ever known, when a young Republican congressman from Vermont named Justin Morrill had an absolutely radical notion that the federal government of the United States would give 30,000 acres of land for each U.S. representative in every state's delegation. And upon that land, or the proceeds from it, the state was mandated to build a public college or university available at low and no cost to the young men and women of that state. The Morrill Land Grant Act. The first school built was MIT. The second was Cornell. Then the great universities of Ohio and Illinois and Wisconsin and Minnesota, Michigan, up to the Pacific Northwest, University of California system, beginning at Berkeley. Across the Southwest to Texas, a system, let it be noted, that has produced more Nobel Prize winners than the Universities of Europe combined. And at the time we did it as a people, less than 1% of Americans had even set foot on a college campus. That's American optimism being the parent of American confidence, being, and together, spawning American future preference, a willingness in the here and now to do that small sacrifice that those who come after us will have a fuller, more just, and more humane life. And what has happened, and I think the tragedy is the question laid down by Ronald Reagan in his debate with Jimmy Carter, adopted by the Democrat, expropriated, is, am I better off? Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? The question has to be, and it has to be in this campaign, it is, are we better off? Are the strongest and most privileged among us more just? Are the weakest and most vulnerable among us more secure and more confident? And I really feel that you can see it most dramatically, an issue David touched on, and that is the difference between the way we handle civil rights in this country in the 1960s, in a decade when the gross national product of the country was doubling and prosperity was rising across the board. Americans were full of confidence and full of optimism and willing to be more generous, willing to be more open. Contrast that with the recent contemporary debate about immigration. Americans in a very much of a defensive crouch, very fearful of their future, very worried about their children's prospect, to the point where, for the first and only time in American life, according to Peter Hart, the Wall Street Journal, NBC pollster, great Democratic pollster, 70% of Americans are not confident that their children's lives will be better than their own. That is a sea change. That is a profound and dangerous difference. The question that comes back, and I think about this campaign and politically, truly is the test laid down by the only man ever elected to the White House 4 times, that the measure of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, but instead whether we provide enough for those who have too little. And there's not, am I better off, but are we better off? And I think the question is either Obama or McCain up to addressing that? Are we ready to be the we generation rather than the me generation? Both of them should recall that at Franklin Roosevelt's death, when his casket was brought to Union Station in Washington and brought through in a caisson through the streets of Washington along Constitution Avenue from Union Station, and Americans were lined 25 deep along the avenue to pay their respects to the flag-draped coffin as it was brought by horses. The only reports we had were those of pencil reporters and the radio. And one radio reporter, a CBS radio reporter, was there, and he noticed a very well-dressed man at 12th and Constitution, tears streaming down his cheeks, just absolutely bereft, inconsolable. And he went up to him, he said, "Excuse me, sir. I noticed your grief, and I want to extend my condolences, but let me have a question for you. Could I ask you?" The man said, "Certainly." He said, "Did you know President Roosevelt?" He said, "No, I didn't know President Roosevelt, but he knew me." And I think that's the test of this election of 2008, whether in fact our leaders and the rest of us who cover this really do know the people we write about and whose votes we seek. Thank you.